bring into view some of the barriers experienced by both students and faculty. Third, to ground our thinking in biblical and theological conviction, because Christian inclusion must be more than a policy language, and it must reflect the character and mission of God. And fourth, to identify practical steps that institutions can begin now. So this session is meant to move us from awareness to discernment, and from discernment to concrete institutional action. And so this theme is especially fitting for ACTEA institutions, because ACTEA is concerned with the strengthening of theological education in Africa. And any serious conversation about strengthening theological education must include the question of who is being formed, who is being left behind, and what kind of institutional culture we are normalizing. So this is about formation first and foremost. And so if our institutions are preparing leaders for the church, then they must make room for the full range of gifts present in the body of Christ. We cannot speak credibly about spiritual formation while remaining inattentive to the ways some people are repeatedly marginalized by our assumptions and systems. Secondly, this is about educational quality. You see, accessible teaching, fair assessment, and meaningful support are not soft extras. They are marks of sound educational practice. And a strong institution is not one that serves only those who easily fit its dominant culture. A strong institution is one that can identify barriers, respond wisely, and help a wider range of learners succeed without lowering standards. And thirdly, this is about also institutional stewardship, policies, faculty development, student support, community life, and leadership culture that all shape whether diverse people merely survive or genuinely flourish. And so the question before us is not whether inclusion belongs in the life of our institutions. The question is whether we are willing to recognize inclusion as part of faithful stewardship, responsible leadership, and educational excellence. At this particular point, it's very important for us to begin by defining what we mean by neurodiversity. Neurodiversity refers to the natural variation in how human brains process attention, memory, language, sensory inputs, learning, social communication, and executive functioning. And in simple terms, people do not all think, feel, process, organize, or respond in the same way. Even as we are here on this platform right now, we all process information differently. Human cognitive diversity is part of human diversity. And so the key shift in a neurodiversity framework is this: difference is not deficiency. That does not mean people never need support. It does not deny struggle, limitation, or impairment. Rather, it asks us to stop reducing a person to a list of deficits and instead to look more carefully at three things: what strengths are present, what barriers are present, and how the environment can be redesigned to enable fuller participation. And at this time, I want to welcome Paul, who is neurodiverse and yet has gone through educational institutions. He's been able to go until he's finished his university, and he's a lawyer. And I want him to bring into the conversation how has been his experience in the educational institutions. And if he's gone through those educational institutions here in Africa, not out there in the Western world, and has been able to achieve and attain the milestones, the achievements he has achieved on merit, how was the journey? What were the challenges? And how has he been able to navigate that? And what would he say concerning this? Can it work in theological institutions? Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much. So, during my university days, allow me to speak for during my university days and also during my Kenya School of Law. That is in I know in Nigeria there's the Nigerian School of Law and other countries, the bar examinations. So during when I did my degree and got my bachelor's of laws, and also when I was preparing for my bar examination, I can say the experience was at first it was really tough, especially when I never used to say, because that time on how neurodivergency was being taken as someone who is foolish, as someone who do not understand certain aspects, and the fact that I did law, which is said to be one of the most rigid courses out there. Um, it was said as if neurodivergency was simply not meant, law was simply not meant for neurodivergence. And until I got up the courage and decided to like tell mostly the faculty that I am neurodivergent. And one thing that I really, really love is that most of the faculty members never took it as an alarming case, but really took it as an they took it as something which they were really asking me on my reasonable accommodation, which when I was given that reasonable accommodation, I was able to keep par with my other colleagues who are typical. And I now, with the advocacy that I did, and also people also coming out and everything, I can say it was feeling better once I got my reasonable accommodation. And on top of getting my reasonable accommodation, I was able to advocate on what neurodivergency is and what will make a neurodivergent um, be at par with others in the society. Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Now, this matters greatly in theological education, giving all the necessary support, because that means that then we are looking at the strengths, we are looking at the barriers and minimizing them, and then working on the environment to redesign to enable full participation of persons who are neurodivergent. Why? Because when we only use a deficit lens, we may quickly interpret difference as weakness, poor attitude, lack of discipline, or even lack of spiritual maturity. But a neurodiversity lens encourages a better set of questions. What is this person carrying? What may they be navigating that others do not see? What gifts are already present, and what support or redesign might make meaningful participation possible? And that shifts from suspicion to understanding is often the beginning of inclusion. And that is what we need to embrace. When we speak about neurodiversity, we are speaking about people who are very likely already in our institutions, even if they have not been named, whether they have not been understood or supported. Some may be autistic and experience differences in sensory processing, communication, routine, or social interaction. Some may live with ADD or ADHD, and navigate differences in attention regulation, working memory, energy levels, or task switching. Others may have dyslexia, which can affect reading speed, decoding, and written language, even when understanding is deep and insight is strong. Still, others may have dyspraxia, which developmental coordination differences that affect code organization, could affect note taking, handwriting, timing, or motor planning. Some experience dysgraphia or dyscalculia, where writing or numeracy becomes difficult in ways that can hide deeper comprehension. And some may have sensory or anxiety related profiles that shape participation through overstimulation, fatigue, shutdown, or the need for careful self regulation. Now, the important thing to remember is that many of these realities remain hidden. A student may not disclose, a lecturer may not understand what they are not seeing. A faculty may have learned to mask and cope at a very high personal cost. And so when we talk about neurodiversity, we are not discussing a distant category of people out there somewhere. We are talking about members of our learning communities, some of whom are already carrying significant burdens quietly without adequate support. Once again, I'll bring on Paul, and I would want Paul to tell us about his journey of neurodivergency, being an autistic boy growing up and masking, the aspect of masking, and how that affected him initially in his studies. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much. So, um, when growing up during that time, first of all, I am said to be a medium to high functioning, autistic person. And once, cause I was once like I was first diagnosed when I was 3 years old. Then I diagnosed again at 14 years old. Um, and when I was diagnosed as 14 years old, I remember my life was all about taking medicines. Well, the psychiatrist was like, just take these medicines. So because I have autism, ADHD as my secondary diagnosis, and schizophrenia as also part of my secondary diagnosis. And I used to remember like I used to take um 7 to 9 tablets a day based on how you how you will act and how you will react to them. So I used to take 7 to 9 tablets. And I was told like those medicines are ones which will help me mask. And when they will help me but for a short time. And I used to get a lot of burnouts, but I couldn't even scream about them because that will mean that I will be given an increase of dosage, and I wouldn't want that. So yeah, it was pretty tough when it came to masking. But when I now so autism as a neurodevelopmental disability and part of neurodivergency, that is when I now started like unmasking. I am still learning to unmask. I have not yet fully unmasked 100%. I am still on the process, but that is when I am starting to unmask, and that is when I am trying to tell people, knowing my triggers and knowing like what to do when those triggers come. Thank you.
To have students like Paul in our theological institutions, to have staff and faculty who are going through difficulties because of masking the condition that they are and the journey that they are walking. But once we begin to see neurodiversity more clearly, we must also resist the temptation to speak only in terms of needs, vulnerabilities, and accommodations. And therefore, we need a strength informed lens. And this is important because it broadens who is seen as capable, called, and able to contribute to the flourishing of our institutions and the society and the church and the kingdom of God at large. Now, many neurodiverse students and faculty bring powerful strengths that institutions often overlook. Some show remarkable pattern recognition and systems thinking, and they see connections that others miss out. Some bring originality, creativity, and imaginative insight that can enrich biblical interpretation, ministry design, or problem solving. Some have an unusual capacity for sustained focus in areas of deep interest, which can become a gift in research. Paul here has mentioned and said he's a researcher. At least that I know. He told me he's a researcher. And an advocate. And advocacy is part and parcel of him. Some could be gifted in teaching, writing, and ministry development. Others are highly detail oriented and may carry strong memory for content, text, structure, or sequence. Some are gifted in technology. Some demonstrate deep empathy, justice, sensitivity, moral clarity, or unconventional problem solving that strengthens communal discernment. And so once we come to realize or their strengths. It is actually a plus, because the point here is not to romanticize neurodiversity or pretend that every challenge is secretly an advantage, but the point is to correct the imbalance. Neurodiverse learners and faculty are not problems to be managed. They are members of the community whose gifts often become more visible when barriers are reduced and dignity is protected and accommodations are given. So the question for institutions is not only what support do they need, it is also what contributions are we currently failing to see because our environments are too narrow, too rushed, or too rigid to recognize them. And at this particular stage, we need to name a difficult but necessary truth. Exclusion usually happens less through open hostility and more through ordinary systems, assumptions, and routines that we never designed with enough breadth in mind. So we are not talking just about open hostility, in our institutions. Exclusion may happen in classroom structure, where instructions are unclear, pacing is rapid, and learning depends almost entirely on heavily verbal delivery. It may happen in assessment design, where there is only one narrow way to show understanding, and usually under time pressure. It may happen in the sensory environment through noise, bright lighting, crowded spaces, and schedules with no breathing room between activities. It may happen through community expectations that privilege one communication style and treat everyone else as less engaged, less mature, or less prepared. Paul, in your journey of academics, did you ever experience exclusion at any given time? Was exclusion a challenge? What do you wish the lecturers, the faculty, the staff, the students could have done differently to enable you better?
Thank you very much. First of all, I will say, most of our facilities, educational facilities, is created for a neurotypical person. It is never seen on a neurodivergent. For example, when we come to assessment, design, you'll find there are lecturers who will come, dictate the notes. They won't give you a course outline, so you don't know. The only time when you know what you're learning is there. Another thing is also on the community expectations. Uh, you find that during, especially this comes during my first and second year, because I think I started advocating for myself during the third year, from the third year. So when it came to community expectations, you will find that this is how you should talk to. When you try to ask questions, you're seen as a disturbant person. And also when it comes to the administrative system, I remember how I had to learn the Odell thing. We used to have a platform called Odell where you'll upload your notes, you'll upload your assignments and everything. I remember how it was very, very tough for me to navigate through it at first. And you find that there's no manual, which you find most neurodivergents will love a manual so that we can know what are we dealing with, how are we dealing with it. It's just like an instructions guide. It is not like a secret, like a secret code, a cheating code. It's not a cheating code. It's just a instruction guide that we needed. So that is one thing I wish uh they will give us, and they will have given us an instruction. They will happen to give us like a course outline, because most of them never used to give us a course outline. And when you ask about a course outline, you will see as if you are rebellious and you are just lazy. You don't want to work hard. And then there's that norm where law school, it's like law school, you have to read, you have to know this, you have to do this. And most of the people tend not to give you a manual. So that is one of the challenges I went through. I am still facing through even right now, but at least with advocacy I am doing, at least I don't face it on a daily basis. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Now, Paul, even though he's talking from a law background, but we are looking at it as an educational institution, and theological institutions are educational institutions. And so if we got a student like Paul in our institution, what will they face? What will be the challenges and the barriers that they will are likely to go through and have to navigate and deal with on a day-to-day basis? Now, exclusion can also happen through spiritual interpretation. In Christian spaces, neurodivergent differences may be misread as laziness, just as Paul has told us, rebellion, as he has mentioned, lack of discipline, or poor spiritual formation, and that is deeply harmful. And then again, there are administrative systems, rigid deadlines, inflexible processes, meeting cultures, and workflow expectations that quietly disadvantage some people again and again, maybe because of where even the meetings have been placed and all that. And if somebody has challenges, if they could be mobility challenges, they could be auditory challenges, they could be sight challenges, and all those things. Now, so when someone is struggling, the first conclusion should not be that the person is the problem, basically. Very often the barrier is embedded in the environment. Once institutions begin to see this, the work of inclusion becomes more honest. We move away from blaming individuals and toward examining the design of our systems. And so we need to always be open-minded and ask ourselves, how is our environment? How is the design of our environment? Now, let us think more specifically about students. Many neurodiverse students in educational institutions work exceptionally hard while carrying hidden cognitive, sensory, social, and emotional demands that others around them may never fully see. They may understand the material well, but struggle to demonstrate that understanding in narrow formats. They may appear withdrawn, inconsistent, late, or overwhelmed when in fact they are managing overload, fatigue, as Paul has mentioned. I mean, taking 9 drugs and tablets on a daily basis in different forms. I can tell you it's not easy. I've had my daughter is 16 now, and from the day she was born up to now, the day she has not gone without swallowing a medication in one form or another, and more than once, over 5 different medications every day, morning, evening. And so there's fatigue, executive functional challenges, or fear of even being misunderstood. Some students may excel in depth, memory, insight, and reflection while finding pacing, note-taking, group work, or oral participation difficult. Some may mask their needs because disclosure feels risky. They don't know the people around them and how they will use the information. They may worry that if they ask for support, they will be seen as weak, unserious, or not called to ministry. And in theological education, especially, some of them may fear that struggle will be interpreted spiritually than understood educationally or neurologically, so that they are being labeled as, people maybe who are possessed or something. And this has serious implications. If we mistake visible struggle for lack of calling, intelligence, character, or discipline, we may silence gifts the church genuinely needs. We may lose future pastors, scholars, teachers, counselors, and servants of God, not because they lacked capacity, but because our institutions lacked enough understanding and flexibility to support them well. So the invitation here is to look again at the student who seems difficult to read, hard to place, or inconsistent in performance. Their challenge may not be a lack of potential. It may be a sign that the institution needs to widen its doors are for the servants of God, and just be able to bring them in, look at how formation and learning are supported, and see how to walk the journey with them. It is again equally important to say that neurodiversity is not only a student matter, even as much as we have talked about students. Once again, we need to realize that when we are forming these students and they are coming through our institutions, universities, and the like, the end goal is that they're going to become professionals. And once they have become professionals, we should be able to accommodate them and welcome them and embrace them. And so they are going to find themselves in our space as staff, as faculty, and of course, in the wider body of Christ as professionals. And so talking about faculty and staff is very fair, because faculty and staff may also be divergent, and many carry their differences quietly, because professional culture often rewards only one visible style of leadership, communication, productivity, and collaboration. Now, if these faculty are not with us, then we need to ask ourselves, where are they at? And maybe this is the place where we need to ask ourselves, we need to be inclusive even in our employment, so that we bring on board persons with disability as well, and not just any disability, but neuro disability, because they are capable people. If they can be lawyers, they can be doctors, they can be teachers, they can be lecturers, they can be engineers, they can be anything and everything anyone else can be. Now, some faculty members may be teaching well, researching diligently, and serving faithfully while managing meetings, marking, email communication, administrative deadlines, and institutional politics at great unseen cost. And those are things that we need to think about and to be aware about, to keep our eyes open to. Some people may struggle with sensory overload, task switching, executive functioning, or social communication in ways that are never named. Others may fear disclosure because they do not want to be misread as, again, staff or faculties that are difficult, disorganized, emotionally fragile, or less competent. So institutional culture matters greatly here. If a workplace only honors one professional style, then gifted staff may spend a great deal of energy masking, compensating, and surviving. And these are detrimental even to their health and to their thriving. And when support is absent, burnout can grow quietly. And this is why support for faculty is not just a pastoral issue, it is also a leadership and a workplace issue, because you don't want to have a faculty, a staff, or even a student who is already neurodivergent, and then they go again into mental health on top of neurodivergency. Because, by the way, mental health is not same as neurodivergency. They are two distinct. And so you don't want to end up again on top of neurodivergency, adding mental health to it. So a more inclusive institution recognizes